Welcome to the Queen's Table podcast. I am your host, Marissa J, and today I'm going to piss you off a little bit. I'm sorry. But I'm going to piss you off a little bit. It's okay. So, you know how I like to talk about science stuff, okay? Just a little bit, and I never really go too deep into too much stuff all the time. Okay, so I'm gonna go real deep into a bunch of stuff today. Listen, my birthday tomorrow. This is coming out, Thursday? September 16th? The 17th is my birthday. So, it's my birthday, and I just feel like I can just talk about whatever the fuck I want to talk about, okay? So, if you don't like sciencey shit, then maybe this ain't the episode for you, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine, baby. I got plenty of episodes. Plenty. Pick one. But today, we're going to get into science. Now, why is that going to piss you off? It's going to piss you off because this episode... Okay, so... See, what had happened was I was supposed to review an episode on another podcast. So, the Kendra Comp show, the guest that we were gonna have on, remember that one time that we were supposed to have somebody on and then the episode was just blank? I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I still don't know what happened. The files are just blank, so I'm sorry. But okay, so I listened to her episode on cheating in open relationships. So with that episode, I wanted to just kind of okay, I'm going to review it. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about that. Just kind of dissect it a little bit. So I got to listening to it, and okay, so yes, I'm a Virgo, but I got a Pisces moon, all right? Which means I be all over the motherfucking place, all right? You could be talking to me about one thing, and my mind would just be completely somewhere the fuck else. I'm listening to you. I can hear what you're saying. I'm comprehending it, but my brain, it does something that's just strange, I guess. I don't know. I believe we're all on the spectrum, some kind of motherfucking way, some kind of motherfucking place. We all on some kind of motherfucking spectrum. So I don't really know, but I do know how to organize that. So you might like this episode. You might not. I'll link the Kendra Comp show, this particular episode that I'm reviewing. I'm linking it in the description of this video. This isn't a video. I'm sorry, guys. I am not video recording at all. This ain't no video. But I'll link it in the description of this episode. Okay, so with all of that being said, I'm not really going to talk about it. Okay, so here's the thing. This is what led me to come up with the chaos that you're about to ensue. Okay, so they were talking about cheating and open relationships. And basically, they were talking about, it was a lot of different guests on the show. And they were talking about their own individual experiences that they've had with cheating and all of that. I'm going to go a little bit deeper under the surface because it's not just so cut and dry. You don't have to. The way that my head works, my crazy brain, the way that it works is I have to understand why. If I don't understand why, it's not going to make sense to me. It's just going to go in one ear and completely out the other. I'll try my best to make it make sense, but if it don't make sense, it don't make sense. So that's what this episode is. I wanted to get a little bit deeper, and I ended up going a little bit too far deep. Just bear with me, okay? I promise it's all gonna make sense. I promise I will connect the dots. It's long. I'm sorry. Maybe listen to this on a long commute or while you in the shower or something. I don't know. It's gonna take a minute to get to the point, but I promise I'm gonna get to the point. Okay? I promise. All right. That's it. Here go the episode. Humans are a dioecious, anisogametic, and moderately sexually dimorphic species of primates. Now, that may all sound like gibberish to you. And I mean, really, nobody's ever going to use that in regular conversation. But if you're trying to prove that the way that we look at males and females and sex and sexual orientation and gender, okay, then you kind of have to look at those group of words and really be able to dissect them. Now, not going to go too deep into that whole thesis right there, but we're going to be going into biology, okay? So all biology is doing is defining what nature is already doing on its own. So don't take any of this as anything other than observing the observable, okay? We are animals, not impervious to following biological rules set for every other animal, okay? So let me throw out a few terms. I'm just going to go over a few terms that we're going to be talking about, all right? So, cells, okay? You got to understand cells. Cells are the most fundamental unit of life, all right? Everything is made up of cells, okay? Then you got DNA. So basically, the DNA is the instruction manual for your body to do certain things like making proteins and stuff. There's DNA inside of every cell. So a string of DNA that codes for particular things is called a gene, and a bunch of genes crumbled up into a wad is called a chromosome. You get 23 chromosomes from each parent, totaling out to 46. Dimorphic, which you have to define these, a lot of times, you know what a compound word is, okay? So a lot of times you have these words that mean one thing, but they're taken from other words in the Latin language mostly. So, okay, so dimorphic. Di means two. Morph means shape. So it's the state of having two shapes. So like how some species has different shapes for males and females. And then we got male and female. That comes from being a dioecious species, which means that there's two sexes. Therefore, a monoecious species only has like one sex, and you guessed it, polyaecious species has more than two sexes. So like example, there's this fruit fly that has 3 different sizes of sperm, each produced by a different type of male. So in that instance, and then you've got to look at their sperm. Their sperm is bigger than the egg. Okay, so let's look at the concept of sex. So sex is a combination of a lot of different things, okay? It can be the size of your reproductive cells, which are called gametes. A large number of smaller gametes means sperm cells, so that way you're a boy. Larger gametes in fewer quantity, okay, means eggs, so you're a girl. But some people don't have any gametes at all, so what does that mean for them? Like someone who is infertile. What does that mean for them? Does that mean that they're not a boy or a girl? Of course not. Okay, so let's look into species or other species. So like ones that have the same size gametes but are also dioecious. They differentiate into mating types, which you could call male and female, but all you have to go on would be who's giving and who's receiving the gametes. So if that's the case, then we'd have to reclassify hundreds of species like seahorses because the female lays her egg in the male and the male carries it to term. But they're classified males and females based off of a whole other slew of characteristics. Then we've got species of animals that are completely hermaphroditic, making them both sperm and eggs. Then you've got sequentially hermaphroditic, which starts off as either male or female, and then later on in life, they switch, mainly just to help everybody else out if they can't find anyone to breed with. Okay, so how about bilateral gonadomorphs that are literally male on one side of their bodies and female on the other side? There's like birds and butterflies, and yes, even some humans can be bilateral gonadomorphic. You can even have that solely in your gonads, where you have both an ovary and testes, ovary tissue and testicular tissue, like in the same organ. And in some species, that's the ground state of all females. So you can't tell by gonadal differences. Okay, so I'm blowing all kinds of holes here, so let's look at the chromosome excuse, okay? The whole excuse, so you either have XX or XY, right? Well, not exactly. The concept of how sex is determined as an organism is usually broken down like this. You've got your chromosomes, all your chromosomes, okay? Those code for what kind of gonads you get. So it's either ovaries or testes, and then those produce germ cells and hormones. And that's how we can tell whether or not you're a boy or a girl. That's the textbook definition, okay? This is wildly inaccurate. So, first of all, the sex of an embryo is evident well before gonads ever develop. In fact, there are plenty of species where external genitalia develop long before gonads ever do. Secondly, there's plenty of chromosomal sex differences that have nothing to do with genitalia or gonads or whatever. So they don't even fall into the whole biological gamete size sex determining model, but are just as important. So, like the human Y chromosome contains instructions for a special kind of ribosome, which is the part of the cell that builds protein. So, protein synthesis is just very slightly different in me than it is for any male, and it has been long before I ever had any hint of a gender. Okay? Now, listen, I promise I'm tying this all together. It's gonna make sense. Just bear with me. Okay, so no, we're not all female by default, and the Y chromosome does not make a boy a boy. So check it. There's a gene on the Y chromosome called the SRY. It's called the SRY gene. SRY. If I say it too fast, it sounds like SRI, but that's not what I'm saying. It's SRY. Okay, so SRI, it plays a pretty big role in the development of testes, and therefore by extension male behavior, but it's not an off-on switch to male behavior. So like, there's been studies that if you find if you take out the SRI gene in the XY chromosomal male mice, okay, this on mice, they develop ovaries and are able to carry full-term pregnancies. But that's because everyone has the genes for both testes and ovaries. What kind of gonads you get, whether it's one or the other or neither or both, comes down to an incredibly complex set of genetic interactions on several different chromosomes. And a few of them aren't even your sex chromosomes. So, for example, the gene that builds testes is called SOX9, and it's on the 17th chromosome, the number 17th chromosome, which everyone in the world has a number 17 chromosome, okay? So, I have ovaries, and that's because on my X chromosome, I have another gene. It's called NR0B1, which makes a protein called DAX1 that stopped the SOX9 from giving me testes. But boys have an X chromosome too, right? So the SRY gene works by producing a protein that binds to the NR0B1 and stops it from making DAX1 so that SOX9 can give that boy his testes. If you have testicles, that's why. Because a gene made a protein that stopped another gene from making a different protein that would have otherwise stopped a different gene from giving you the testicles that you have. So there's like a million ways this can go sideways. So that means like if you have a perfectly functional Y chromosome, but you have a problem with your SOX9 gene, and so you still end up with ovaries. Or this could mean that you have no Y chromosome at all, but you have a faulty NR0B1 gene, and so you still end up with testicles. Okay, so let's say you've got all the right chromosomes doing all the right things at all the right places. Well, none of that really matters because the hormones that your gonads produce actually makes your body look and act male or female. But I've spoken long enough on this. Basically, it would take longer to discuss this than the whole genes aspect of it. Okay, just trust me on this. I'll give you one example. You could have a daughter that's 17 years old that hasn't gotten her cycle yet. You take her to the doctor where you learn that your daughter is actually your son who has androgenetic sensitivity syndrome. So their cells aren't producing the receptors to bind testosterone. So even though they've gotten enough testosterone in their body to do all the things men can do, they still look and feel like a girl. Then you've got other types of birds and lizards and stuff that don't even determine sex by their genes or chromosomes or any of that stuff, but by the temperature of their eggs. So if where they lay their eggs is too hot or too cold, that'll determine the sex of the thing that's inside the egg. So all of this to say we have variations, not anomalies, not deformities, not defects. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about variations. We all have kinds of variations. My nerves may pass through my muscles differently than yours. My pancreas could be a different shape than yours. This isn't an anomaly, but a variation. A defect would be if my pancreas had holes in it, okay? So, would it be so hard to accept that things like sex or gender could be subject to the same kinds of variations? And those variations would be, at most, equally inconsequential. There's no standard template for determining male versus female development in biology. And unless you have had your DNA sequenced and analyzed by a developmental biologist, you have no idea what's going on with you in your body in this respect. The language of genetics is in no way laconic or easy to decipher, and that makes it impossible to reduce things like sex and gender down to a binary. Gametes can be gendered in this way, but not brains and bodies. We all live on the spectrum, and people are under no obligation to make sense to you. Let me say that one more time. People are under no obligation to make sense to you. Okay? So, gender is an emergent feature of social situations, both as an outcome of a rationale for various social arrangements and as a means of legitimating one of the most fundamental divisions of society. Okay? We've labeled gender based off of generation to generation, not person to person. So gender is just a term that we use for how an individual organism chooses to express their sexual identity in a culture context. It's a reflection of that individual's expectations and society's expectations of their behavior. Masculine and feminine have no real concrete definition and has absolutely no part in biology, okay? So language forms our reality, all right? So for example, in the 1940s, that's when we started making the change of blue for boys and pink for girls. Before then, that wasn't a thing. Go look up pictures of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he was a child. They dressed up every child, boy or girl, in dresses and bonnets and frilly socks and all of that stuff. They dressed everybody up like that. Why? Because the rate of children dying before the 40s, which is when inoculations were like a really, really big thing against a lot of different diseases. So before then, when you had things like polio, you may have had a whole bunch of children, but only a few of them survived past 5 or 6 years old. So up until you were about 7 or 8 years old, you were dressed in girls' clothing. Well, what we would consider girls' clothing, because they couldn't be bothered to give you a gender until you've reached that threshold of, oh, okay, this one's gonna make it. That's dark. It's dark as fuck, but that's how shit was. So the people weren't even bothered as much by gender because they didn't even know if you were gonna be alive or not. It wasn't until you're 7 or 8 years old that they started putting boys in pants and, little hats and did all the things and stuff. Okay? So language has historically simplified itself, not the other way around. But we won't get into linguistics because, we're going on 20 minutes here. I promise you, I could go on even longer when it comes to the mechanics of language and how it enforces certain things in our society, including how we define gender and sex. But if you really want to push the idea that everybody fits into just one out of however many boxes you're going to have to figure out dozens, if not hundreds, of different categories just to fit this insanely paradoxical worldview that you insist on keeping. So, I'm putting it together, guys. Okay? I'm putting it together. I promise. So before we get into social constructs, we have to look at how we pair. So we've got this tremendous drive to fall in love and pair and rear our children as a team of two. And some people happen to have a predisposition of restlessness. We tend to be an animal that forms a pair bond for a period of time, breaks that pair bond, and then forms a new pair bond. Serial monogamy and clandestine adultery. When Australopithecus, a bipedal primate ancestor of ours with both ape-like and human characteristics that lived in Africa about 1 to 4 million years ago, came out of the trees, they had to learn how to walk over very dangerous open grasslands. And at that point, they started to stand on 2 legs. They started to create and use tools, find places to eat without being bothered by other land creatures. And at this time, the females started to have to carry their young in their arms instead of on their backs as they did before. So if you're holding a whole human being, okay, while also gathering food, tools, running from predators, you find someone to help you out too. So in this sense, I'd say monogamy began when there was a great need for it. To run in a group of different people that they shared the same affection and sexual proclivities with they'd always be in danger of being replaced by someone more suitable for their partner's specific needs. For example, a male hominoid doesn't have the capacity to expand his bloodline directly, meaning he can't have his own babies, and would want to find a female that would agree to bear his offspring in exchange for protection over herself and said offspring from predators and themselves, as some were cannibalistic. Okay. A male would not have been able to protect a harem of females in these open grasslands. So pair bonding became essential to females and suitable to males. And humanity went over the monogamy threshold. Okay. And we began to evolve and drive to fall in love and form a pair bond and rear our offspring as a team, a hallmark of the human and the human animal today. But so now we don't live in open grasslands unprotected. And now that we have the advent of things like daycare centers and strollers and baby formula and Uber Eats, where does that leave us with how we deal with relationships? I would first like to ask why. Why do we feel the compulsory need to claim ownership over another human being? When we say things like cheating and open relationships, that implies one has the right to give permission over what the other does with their own bodies. So who decided this normative? Who has the ability to change it? Well, we did and we do. We as in society. We have the ability and the authority because we always have. We're the ones that are so obsessed with labeling things like gender and sex and time. Therefore, we're the only ones that can change it. And just as we in society change our way of thinking as science changes, we must also improve upon society in that same way. We've got to realize that we no longer benefit from pair bonding and that polyamory may be the most advantageous for our ever-changing society. So what does that mean? That means that we're fucking changing, okay? And just like we're having to change how we see people, how we view people, what pronouns to call people, because science is ever changing, as it should be, okay? Because we learn more as we learn more, as we evolve, we learn more, and we have to share that knowledge amongst the community. So that way our society can keep up. So just as in the 40s, when kids were living longer and kids weren't dying as young, they were able to start to form those male-female concepts at an early age. Well, now that science is at it once again and proving that there are multiple ways of defining gender and sex, we have to change along with that scientific breakthrough. Okay, so in the same way, why are we not able to understand and grasp the concept of being with more than one person? It's that compulsory need to take ownership over another human being. And that is a conversation for another day. That's it. Bye.